The listening lamp flickers to life, illuminating the space between worlds. Here, science whispers to spirit, and reality bends to imagination. Curl up in the cosmic glow as we unveil the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. The Pause Button, a short story written by Rob Corrigan, narrated by Ava Clark.
The shrill beep of the alarm clock pierced the pre-dawn darkness, jolting Jessica from a fitful sleep. She fumbled for her phone, squinting at the much too bright screen. Ugh. 5:30 a.m. With a groan, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, the cool hardwood floor a shock against her bare feet. Another day, another marathon, Jessica thought, rubbing the grit from her eyes. The weight of looming deadlines and unfinished briefs already pressed down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her before she'd even started her day. As she padded down the hallway, the scent of fresh coffee filled her nostrils, a small miracle courtesy of the programmable coffee maker. Best thing I got out of the divorce, she mused, pouring the steaming liquid into her world's okayest mom mug, a gift from Abby that never failed to bring a smile to her lips. The first sip of coffee sent a jolt of warmth through her body, chasing away the last cobwebs of sleep. Jessica closed her eyes, savoring the moment of quiet before the whirlwind of the day began. "Mommy?" A small voice called from down the hall, shattering the silence. Jessica's eyes snapped open, her moment of peace evaporating like mist in the morning sun. "Coming, sweetie," she called back, setting down her mug with a sigh. Abby's room was a riot of color in the soft glow of her nightlight. Stuffed animals spilled from every surface, and half-finished art projects littered the floor. In the middle of it all sat Abby, her dark curls a wild tangle around her face. "Bad dream?" Jessica asked, perching on the edge of the bed. Abby nodded, lower lip trembling. Without a word, Jessica gathered her daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. For a moment, the rest of the world fell away, and Jessica felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. This is what matters, she thought fiercely, tightening her embrace. But all too soon, reality intruded. The glowing numbers on Abby's clock reminded Jessica of the ticking time, of all the tasks that needed to be accomplished before they could leave for school and work. "All right, Munchkin," Jessica said, reluctantly pulling away. "Time to get ready for school. What do you want for breakfast?" The next hour passed in a blur of cereal bowls, mismatched socks, and hastily packed lunches. Jessica moved on autopilot, her mind already at work, reviewing case files and meeting schedules. "Mommy!" Abby's panicked voice cut through Jessica's mental to-do list. "I forgot about my diorama. It's due today." Jessica froze, a peanut butter-smeared knife hovering over Abby's sandwich. "What diorama?" "For science class. We're supposed to make a model of a habitat. I was going to do the rainforest, remember?" The memory surfaced of a half-hearted trip to the craft store last weekend, buried under a mountain of other commitments. Jessica's heart sank. How could I have forgotten? "Okay, don't panic," Jessica said, as much to herself as to Abby. "We can fix this. Grab that shoebox from the recycling bin. I think we have some green construction paper somewhere." What followed was a frantic attempt at crafting a rainforest in miniature. Jessica's fingers flew, cutting and gluing with more speed than precision. Abby tried to help, her small hands clumsy with haste and worry. "There," Jessica said, stepping back to survey their work. It was far from perfect, but it would have to do. She glanced at her watch and felt her stomach drop. "Oh no, we're going to be late." In her haste to get the diorama to the car, Jessica's foot caught on a stray stuffed animal. She stumbled, the shoebox slipping from her grasp. Time seemed to slow as Jessica watched the diorama tumble through the air, paper trees and cotton ball clouds scattering across the floor. "No!" Abby cried, dropping to her knees to gather the wreckage. Jessica stood frozen, staring at the mess. The carefully constructed facade of control she'd been maintaining crumbled. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't. Warm arms encircled her waist. Jessica looked down to see Abby hugging her tightly. "It's okay, Mommy," Abby said, her voice muffled against Jessica's shirt. "We can fix it. Don't cry." Shame washed over Jessica. She was supposed to be the one comforting Abby, not the other way around. What kind of mother am I? The drive to school was tense and quiet. Jessica's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her mind a whirlwind of self-recrimination and worry. As they pulled up to the school, Jessica noticed an old woman standing near the entrance, watching them with an unnerving intensity. "I'm sorry about the diorama, sweetie," Jessica said as Abby gathered her things. "I'll talk to your teacher, explain what happened." Abby nodded, her earlier resilience fading into anxiety. As she climbed out of the car, the old woman approached. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I couldn't help but notice you seem overwhelmed." Jessica bristled at the intrusion, but before she could respond, the woman pressed something into her hand. It was cool and metallic, about the size of a large coin. "Time is precious," the woman said cryptically. "Use it wisely." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of arriving students and parents. Jessica looked down at the object in her hand. It was an intricately engraved pendant, ancient-looking and oddly heavy for its size. A shiver ran down her spine. "Mom?" Abby called from the school steps. "Are you coming?" Jessica shook her head, tucking the pendant into her pocket. "No, sweetie. I've got to get to work. Have a good day. I love you." As she drove away, Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. The pendant seemed to pulse in her pocket, a promise, or perhaps a warning, of things to come. Jessica burst through the law firm's glass doors, her heels clicking frantically against the polished marble floor. The lobby's imposing clock showed 9:07 a.m. She was late, again. Her heart raced as she jabbed the elevator button, the events of the morning weighing heavily on her mind. "I'm a terrible mother, and now I'll be a terrible employee too," she thought, stepping into the elevator. The pendant in her pocket seemed to grow heavier, a physical reminder of the strange encounter outside Abby's school. The office was already a hive of activity when Jessica arrived. Phones rang incessantly, keyboards clacked, and the air buzzed with urgent conversations. She slipped into her cubicle, hoping to avoid notice. "Rough morning?" Sarah, her closest work friend, peered over the partition. Jessica managed a weak smile. "You have no idea." Before she could elaborate, her computer pinged with a new email, then another, and another. Jessica's shoulders tensed as she scanned the subject lines. Urgent requests, looming deadlines, and a meeting she'd completely forgotten about. "Breathe," she reminded herself, fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to triage the most pressing issues. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to grow louder with each passing minute, a countdown to... what? Failure? A breakdown? Jessica wasn't sure which would come first. "Harrison wants to see you," Sarah's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Something about the Mackenzie brief?" Jessica's blood ran cold. The Mackenzie brief, due today, barely started, and critical for a high-profile case. How could she have let it slip through the cracks? She stumbled to her feet, smoothing her wrinkled blouse as she made her way to the senior partner's office. Harrison barely looked up as she entered, his steel-gray eyes fixed on a document before him. "The Mackenzie brief," he said without preamble. "I need it within the hour. The client's pushing for an early filing." "An hour?" Jessica's voice came out as a squeak. "But I thought—" Harrison's gaze snapped to her face, cold and unyielding. "1 hour, Jessica. Make it happen." Back at her desk, panic clawed at Jessica's throat. She needed days for this brief, not minutes. Her fingers trembled as she pulled up the case files, mind racing as she tried to formulate a plan. Sarah, oblivious to Jessica's plight, leaned over the cubicle wall garbling on about her personal life challenges. Jessica's mind crumbled. "I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't. Please, stop." Her hand, seeking comfort, brushed against the pendant in her pocket. In an instant, the world around her ground to a halt. The constant noise of the office cut out abruptly, leaving behind an eerie, absolute silence. Jessica blinked, uncomprehending. Sarah stood frozen mid-stride, a coffee mug suspended impossibly in the air where she'd been gesturing. Papers hung motionless in the air around a jammed printer. "What the—" Jessica whispered, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. She waved a hand in front of Sarah's face. No reaction. Heart pounding, she glanced at her watch. To her surprise, it was still ticking. A giddy sense of possibility washed over her. "Time has stopped," she realized. "I can use this to finish the brief." Jessica threw herself into the work, fingers flying across the keyboard. She had just started to feel like she was making progress, when, suddenly, sound and motion crashed back into the world. And then I told him, "Jess, you okay?" Sarah's voice cut in mid-sentence, her concerned face suddenly animated. Jessica blinked rapidly, disoriented. She glanced at her watch. Exactly 60 seconds had passed. Yes, I'm fine, just focused," she managed to reply. As Sarah continued her story, Jessica's mind raced. The pendant had given her 60 seconds of extra time. It wasn't much, but if she could do it again. Her hand slipped into her pocket, touching the pendant once more. The world froze again. Over the next hour, Jessica fell into a rhythm. Work frantically for 60 seconds, pause to let the world catch up, then trigger the pendant again. It was exhausting, disorienting work, but she was making progress. With each pause, Jessica felt a mix of exhilaration and unease. The power was intoxicating, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there might be consequences she couldn't yet see. As the hour drew to a close, Jessica triggered the pendant one last time. She put the finishing touches on the brief, her heart pounding with a mixture of triumph and disbelief. Just as she hit send, the world lurched back into motion. Harrison's reply came almost immediately. "Excellent work. I knew you'd come through." A warm glow of pride battled with lingering disbelief and a new, unsettling question. What had she done? What power had she tapped into, and at what cost? As Jessica packed up to leave that evening, her mind swirled with possibilities. She felt accomplished, energized even, but there was an undercurrent of unease she couldn't quite shake. The pendant sat heavy in her pocket, a constant reminder of its mysterious power. Stepping out into the cool evening air, Jessica took a deep breath. She had so much to process, so many questions, but for now, there was only one thing that mattered: getting home to Abby, hugging her tight, and making up for the morning's chaos. As she hailed a taxi, Jessica couldn't help but wonder, In a world where she could pause time for 60 seconds at a time, would she finally find the moments that truly mattered? Or was she just delaying the inevitable crash? Jessica's eyes fluttered open, seconds before her alarm was set to blare. A smile tugged at her lips as her hand found the pendant on her nightstand. With a gentle touch, the world froze, granting her an extra minute of serenity before the day began. As the effect wore off, Jessica sprung into action. She moved through her morning routine with newfound efficiency, pausing time in strategic bursts. By the time Abby's usual wake-up time rolled around, Jessica had already showered, dressed, and was halfway through preparing a special breakfast. The scent of cinnamon and warmth filled the kitchen as Jessica flipped golden brown French toast onto a plate. I owe her this, she thought, remembering the chaos of the previous morning. I owe her so much more. Mommy? Abby's sleepy voice called from the hallway. What smells so good? Jessica turned, drinking in the sight of her daughter, hair mussed from sleep and eyes wide with surprise. Good morning, sunshine. I thought we'd start the day with something special. Breakfast was a leisurely affair, filled with giggles and maple syrup sticky kisses. As they drove to school, Jessica found herself fully present in a way she hadn't been in years. Are you nervous about your science presentation today? She asked, recalling a conversation from days ago that she'd only half heard at the time. Abby's eyes lit up. You remembered! I've been practicing all week. A warm glow of connection settled in Jessica's chest as they continued to chat. As they pulled up to the school, she found herself scanning the crowd, half expecting to see the enigmatic old woman who had given her the pendant. But there was no sign of her. Have a great day, sweetie, Jessica said, hugging Abby tight. I can't wait to hear all about your presentation later. As she walked into her office, Jessica felt a spring in her step. She was early, prepared, and ready to tackle whatever the day might bring. Her colleagues did double takes as she breezed past, a far cry from her usual frazzled entrance. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of productivity. With judicious use of the pendant, Jessica found herself ahead of schedule for the first time in recent memory. Tasks that would normally take hours were completed in what felt like minutes. By lunchtime, her to-do list was nearly conquered. It wasn't until her stomach growled that Jessica realized she hadn't checked the time in hours. She glanced at her watch, then frowned, looking up at the office clock. There was a discrepancy, small but noticeable. Her watch was running ahead, showing a time several minutes later than the wall clock. Weird, she thought. It's running fast. The concern was quickly pushed aside as she realized she could use the pendant to extend her lunch break. For the first time in months, she treated herself to a proper meal and even squeezed in a quick manicure. Returning to the office, Jessica felt refreshed and ready for the afternoon. Her new sense of calm was immediately tested when Sarah leaned over her cubicle wall. Heads up, she whispered. Surprise client meeting in 30 minutes. Harrison wants everyone prepped and in the conference room. In the past, this news would have sent Jessica into a panic. Today, she simply nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. With the help of her secret weapon, 30 minutes was more than enough time. The meeting was a triumph. Jessica fielded questions with ease, her responses backed by research she'd had time to conduct. As they filed out of the conference room, she caught Harrison's appraising look. Impressive work in there, Jessica. he said. "Keep this up, and we might need to talk about your future here." Pride swelled in Jessica's chest, tempered by a nagging sense of unease. "I earned this," she told herself firmly. "The pendant just helped." As the workday wound down, Jessica realized she had completed everything on her list, even tasks scheduled for later in the week. Making a split-second decision, she packed up her things and headed out, eager to spend extra time with Abby. The evening was filled with simple pleasures, helping with homework, working on an art project, and just talking. As they sat together on the couch, Abby snuggled close. "You seem different, Mommy," she said softly. "Happier, less busy." Jessica's heart clenched. "I'm trying, sweetie. I want to be here for you more." "I like it," Abby said, her voice heavy with sleep. "Can it stay this way?" "I hope so," Jessica whispered, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "I really hope so." Later that night, after Abby had gone to bed, Jessica sat at her desk, examining the pendant closely. She still didn't understand how it worked, but she was beginning to grasp its limitations and potential. Her mind raced with possibilities, how much more she could accomplish, how much better their lives could be. As she set her alarm for the morning, Jessica noticed her watch again. The discrepancy had grown. It was now nearly 3 hours ahead of the actual time. A flicker of concern passed through her, but she pushed it aside. "It's just running a bit fast," she reasoned as she corrected it. "A small price to pay for how much better everything is now." Settling into bed, Jessica felt a sense of optimism she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow was full of promise, and for once, she felt ready to meet it. As she drifted off to sleep, her hand curled protectively around the pendant, the key to her new life. In her dreams, a clock ticked frantically, its hands spinning forward at an alarming rate. But Jessica slept on, unaware of the temporal storm brewing on her horizon. The morning air was crisp as Jessica strode down the busy city sidewalk, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. All around her, the city pulsed with rush-hour energy, cars honking, pedestrians hurrying, the distant rumble of the subway beneath her feet. But for the first time in years, Jessica felt like she was gliding above the chaos rather than drowning in it. "I've got this," she thought, allowing herself a small smile. Everything's finally falling into place. As she waited at a crosswalk, Jessica's hand absently brushed the pendant in her pocket. Its weight was comforting, a secret talisman of control in a world that had always felt overwhelming. The light turned green, and she stepped off the curb, her mind already racing through the day's to-do list. That's when she saw him, a young man on a bicycle, head down, thumbs flying across his phone screen as he pedaled. Jessica's heart leapt into her throat as she realized his trajectory. He was headed straight for the intersection, oblivious to the changing lights and the cars starting to move. Without conscious thought, Jessica's hand closed around the pendant. The world froze. The sudden silence was jarring. Jessica stood rooted to the spot, her eyes darting between the suspended tableau before her. The cyclist, mere feet from disaster. A taxi, its driver's face a mask of dawning horror. A mother on the opposite corner, arms outstretched towards her wide-eyed toddler. Jessica's mind raced. She could prevent this. She could step in, alter the course of events, save the young man from injury or worse. But should she? What right did she have to interfere? And if she did, what consequences might ripple out from this moment, unseen and unintended? If I don't act, I'm practically responsible, she argued with herself. But if I do, am I playing God? The weight of the decision pressed down on her, seconds ticking away in her mind, though the world remained motionless. Finally, with a shaky exhale, Jessica moved. She carefully navigated around the frozen figures, making her way to the cyclist. With effort, she managed to turn his handlebars, angling the bike away from the intersection and towards the safety of the curb. As she stepped back, a wave of dizziness washed over her. Whether from the exertion or the magnitude of what she'd done, she wasn't sure. Jessica had barely regained her position when time lurched back into motion. The cacophony of the city rushed back, making her wince. She watched, heart pounding, as the cyclist sailed safely past the intersection, still blissfully unaware of his brush with fate. "Did you see that?" A voice behind her gasped. "That bike it's like it turned on its own." "Nah, must have been the wind or something," another replied. "Lucky break for that kid, though." Jessica hurried away, her legs shaky and her mind reeling. She'd altered the course of events, potentially saved a life. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. At the office, Jessica found it nearly impossible to focus. She stared at her computer screen, the words blurring as her mind kept replaying the morning's events. "Earth to Jessica," Sarah's voice cut through her reverie. "You okay?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica forced a smile. "I'm fine, just had a bit of a near miss on the way to work. You know how it is." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Those always shake you up. Makes you think about fate and all that, doesn't it? How one tiny thing can change everything." "You have no idea," Jessica thought, the pendant suddenly feeling very heavy in her pocket. During her lunch break, Jessica found herself falling down an internet rabbit hole, reading about ethics, time travel, and the butterfly effect. The philosophical debates she encountered only intensified her inner conflict. Who was she to decide which events to change? Where was the line between helping and meddling? As the afternoon wore on, Jessica became hyper-aware of every minor office issue that cropped up. A jammed printer, a misplaced file, a colleague struggling with a presentation. All things she could easily fix with a quick pause. Her hand twitched towards the pendant several times, but each time she stopped herself. "Not for this," she decided. "It has to be for important things only." That evening, as she tucked Abby into bed, her daughter shared a story about helping a classmate who was being bullied. "I was scared to say something," Abby admitted. "But then I remembered what you always say about doing the right thing, even when it's hard." Jessica's throat tightened with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," she managed, seeing parallels with her own morning intervention. "Sometimes it's hard to know what the right thing is, but we have to trust our hearts and do our best." Later, alone in the dim light of her bedroom, Jessica held the pendant up, watching it glint in the moonlight. Its power was incredible, but the responsibility it carried was daunting. She thought of the cyclist, of Abby, of all the countless moments where a small action could change everything. "Okay," she whispered to the pendant, to herself, to the universe at large. "I'll use you, but only when it really matters, only to help, never for personal gain. I promise." As she drifted off to sleep, Jessica's dreams were a swirling mix of triumph and anxiety. In them, she stood at a great crossroads, countless paths stretching out before her, each one shifting and changing with every choice she made. And always, in the background, the relentless ticking of a clock, its hands spinning ever faster. Jessica's eyes snapped open, heart racing as she registered the bright sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. She grabbed her watch, squinting at the display. 8:15 a.m. Her stomach dropped. No, 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 she muttered, leaping out of bed. How had she slept through her alarm? She rushed to Abby's room, finding her daughter still peacefully asleep. Abby, wake up! We're late! Jessica's voice was shrill with panic as she shook her daughter awake. The next 20 minutes were a blur of hastily thrown-on clothes, unbrushed hair, and a breakfast consisting of granola bars, grabbed on the way out the door. Jessica's mind whirled with confusion. She always set multiple alarms. How could this have happened? As they pulled up to the school, Jessica glanced at her watch again. 8:55 a.m. They'd made it, just barely. She let out a sigh of relief as she hurried Abby towards the entrance. But something was off. The playground was empty, the halls eerily quiet. A sinking feeling grew in Jessica's stomach as they reached Abby's classroom, finding the lesson already in full swing. Abby's teacher, Mrs. Thompson, looked up with a mixture of surprise and disapproval. Abby, Jessica, we weren't sure you were coming today. Class started 20 minutes ago. Jessica blinked, uncomprehending. She glanced at her watch again, then at the clock on the classroom wall. There was nearly a 30-minute difference between them. I'm so sorry, she stammered, feeling her face flush with embarrassment. My watch. I think it's broken. It won't happen again. The drive to work was a haze of confusion and self-recrimination. Jessica's eyes kept darting to her watch, then to the car's clock, watching the discrepancy between them grow. By the time she rushed into her office, apology already forming on her lips, she was shocked to find she was actually 15 minutes early. Everything okay, Jess? Sarah asked, eyeing her disheveled appearance with concern. You look like you've been through the ringer, and it's not even 9 a.m. Jessica managed a weak smile. Just having some time management issues, she said, the irony of her words not lost on her. The morning passed in a blur of confusion. Jessica found herself constantly checking her watch against the office clock, her sense of time increasingly disoriented. Sometimes slow, sometimes really fast. When she arrived an hour early for an important client meeting, the reality of her situation began to truly sink in. During her lunch break, Jessica examined her watch closely. The second hand seemed to be moving slightly faster than it should, then slightly slower, the minutes ticking by at an uneven pace. No matter how she adjusted it, within minutes it would be running off time again. A quick internet search on temporal discrepancies and time dilation only served to increase her anxiety. Phrases like relativistic effects and time-space continuum jumped out at her, far too similar to her current situation for comfort. The afternoon was a struggle in productivity. Without the pendant to rely on, Jessica found herself constantly behind, missing deadlines and sending confused emails to colleagues for queries they hadn't asked for yet. The temptation to use the pendant again grew with each passing hour, but fear of exacerbating the time discrepancy held her back. By the time she picked up Abby from after-school care, later than intended, Jessica was a bundle of frayed nerves. Mommy, are you okay? Abby asked as they drove home. You seem different lately, like you're here, but also not here. Jessica's heart clenched at her daughter's perceptiveness. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Mommy's just been a little distracted lately. There's been a lot going on at work. Is it because time is going too fast? Abby asked innocently. Sometimes I feel like that too, like the day is over before it even started. Jessica nearly swerved off the road, startled by how close to home Abby's words hit. Time is a tricky thing, she said carefully. Sometimes it seems to fly by, and other times it drags. The important thing is to try to be present in each moment. Hypocrite, a voice in her head whispered. How can you talk about being present when you've been manipulating time for weeks? That evening, as Abby slept, Jessica sat at her desk, attempting to plan out the next day. But how could she schedule anything when she couldn't trust her own perception of time? She set multiple alarms on her phone, wrote out a detailed timeline, even considered buying a new watch. But deep down, she knew these were just band-aids on a much larger problem. As she crawled into bed, Jessica made a decision. She would stop using the pendant, at least for a while. Maybe if she went back to experiencing time normally, these discrepancies would resolve themselves. Her sleep was fitful, plagued by dreams of being lost in a labyrinth of clocks, all showing different times. She ran down endless corridors, trying to find a way out, but every turn just led to more clocks, their ticking growing louder and more distorted. Jessica jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Her hand automatically reached for her watch on the nightstand. As she squinted at its face in the dim light, her blood ran cold. The date on the watch read, 3 days in the future. Jessica sat up, fully awake now, her heart pounding. She looked from the watch to her phone, confirming the impossible discrepancy. As the first light of dawn crept through her window, Jessica was left to grapple with a chilling realization. Her manipulation of time wasn't just affecting her watch or her schedule. Somehow, impossibly, she was becoming untethered from time itself, and she had no idea how to stop it. Jessica's eyes fluttered open, her mind foggy with confusion. She reached for her phone, then hesitated. What day was it? Her gaze darted between her watch, phone, and bedside clock, each telling a different story of time. With a groan, she hauled herself out of bed. "Okay, universe," she muttered. "Let's see what kind of time roller coaster you have in store for me today." As she got ready, Jessica made a conscious decision to ignore her watch. She'd rely on external clocks and her phone, which seemed less affected by her time-bending escapades. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something. On the subway to work, Jessica found herself hyper-aware of her surroundings. Her eyes caught a flash of movement, a woman's wallet slipping from her purse as she rushed to exit the train. Without thinking, Jessica's hand moved to the pendant in her pocket. Should I? She wondered, her finger hovering over the cool metal. It's for a good cause, right? Before she could second-guess herself, Jessica activated the pendant. The world froze. She quickly retrieved the wallet and placed it back in the woman's bag. As time resumed, Jessica felt a rush of satisfaction watching the oblivious woman hurry off, crisis averted. Her good mood evaporated as she arrived at her office building to find the lights still off and doors locked. A bleary-eyed security guard eyed her suspiciously. "Bit eager today, aren't we?" He chuckled, checking his watch. "You're about 2 hours early, miss." Jessica forced a laugh, mumbling something about an important project as she slunk to her desk. But as she booted up her computer, a thought struck her. She had 2 whole hours of uninterrupted work time. By the time her colleagues arrived, she had plowed through a mountain of tasks. Maybe I'm finally getting the hang of this, she thought, a spark of confidence igniting in her chest. That spark turned into a roaring flame at lunchtime. As she left a cafe, Jessica spotted a young boy breaking away from his distracted mother, running straight towards oncoming traffic. Without hesitation, she triggered the pendant. The world skidded to a halt as Jessica dashed forward, scooping the child up and depositing him safely back on the sidewalk just as time resumed. The rush of adrenaline, the knowledge that she'd saved a life, it was intoxicating. For the first time since receiving the pendant, Jessica felt like she truly understood its purpose. She wasn't just manipulating time, she was using it to make the world better. But the afternoon brought her crashing back to reality. Time began to slip and slide around her once more. She arrived at a conference room for an important client meeting, only to find it empty. A quick check of her email revealed she was 3 hours late. The meeting had come and gone. "I'm so sorry," she babbled to her furious boss later. "My calendar. There must have been a glitch. It won't happen again." As she left work that evening, Jessica found herself scanning her surroundings, looking for opportunities to help. A dropped bag here, a near collision there. She used the pendant again and again, each small act of kindness giving her a fresh burst of energy. But by the time she arrived home, that energy had drained away, leaving her exhausted to her bones. She trudged through the door, thanking the departing teenage babysitter, to find Abby curled up on the couch, a hurt look in her eyes. "You're late again," Abby said quietly. "We were supposed to start my science project tonight, remember?" The guilt hit Jessica like a physical blow. She'd been so caught up in helping strangers that she'd neglected her own daughter. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she said, pulling Abby into a hug. "Work was crazy, but I'm here now. Let's get started on that project, okay?" Later that night, after Abby had gone to bed, Jessica sat at her desk, turning the pendant over in her hands. She thought about the lives she'd touched today, the accidents she'd prevented. But she also thought about the meeting she'd missed, the hurt in Abby's eyes. "I'm helping people," she argued with herself. "Isn't that what matters?" But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "At what cost?" Jessica realized she was standing on a precipice. The power to help was seductive, but it was also consuming her. She needed rules, boundaries. Otherwise, she might lose herself and her relationship with Abby in the chaos of fractured time. "Okay," she said aloud, her voice firm. "From now on, emergencies only, no more petty uses, and family comes first, always." As she drifted off to sleep, the pendant clutched in her hand, Jessica's dreams were a swirling mix of heroic rescues and looming clock faces. She saw herself racing through the city, saving lives left and right. But with each rescue, the clocks grew larger, their ticking louder, until they threatened to drown out everything else. In the murky space between sleep and waking, a thought surfaced in Jessica's mind. What if helping others was only the beginning? What if the pendant had an even greater purpose, one she had yet to discover? The thought lingered as she fell into deeper sleep, a promise, or perhaps a warning, of greater challenges to come. The cacophony of multiple alarms jolted Jessica awake. She bolted upright, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of the conflicting sounds. Her phone, her bedside clock, even the old-fashioned alarm clock she'd dug out of storage, all were blaring at different times. "What day is it?" she muttered, fumbling to silence the noise. Her gaze darted between the various timepieces, each telling a different story. The digital clock on her nightstand insisted it was 6:30 a.m. on Tuesday. Her phone claimed it was 7:15 a.m. on Thursday. And her watch was somehow showing next Monday's date. Jessica pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to quell the rising panic. She'd set multiple alarms as a safeguard, but now they only added to her confusion. With a groan, she hauled herself out of bed. Whatever day it was, Abby still needed to get to school. The next hour was a blur of rushed preparations and half-hearted attempts at normalcy. Jessica couldn't shake the feeling that she was forgetting something crucial, but every time she tried to pin down the thought, it slipped away like smoke. As they pulled up to the school, Jessica's stomach dropped. The parking lot was empty. the building dark. "Mom?" Abby's voice was small and confused. "Where is everyone?" Jessica's mind raced. Had she lost track of not just hours, but entire days? Was it the weekend? A holiday she'd forgotten? She forced a smile she didn't feel. "Looks like we got our days mixed up, sweetie. No school today." The disappointment and bewilderment in Abby's eyes cut Jessica to the core. She'd promised to do better, to be more present, and here she was, failing spectacularly. With Abby safely dropped off at a hastily arranged playdate, Jessica sped to work, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She burst into the office, apology already forming on her lips, only to be met with startled looks from the skeletal weekend crew. "Jessica," her colleague Mark blinked at her in surprise. "Everything okay?" "It's Saturday." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Saturday? How had she lost track of an entire week? Jessica mumbled something about a mix-up, feeling the weight of concerned stares as she retreated. Finding herself at a nearby cafe, Jessica tried to piece together the lost days. But her memories were a jumble of disjointed moments and blurred time. Had she been to work? Picked up Abby? She couldn't be sure of anything anymore. As panic threatened to overwhelm her, a flash of familiar gray hair caught her eye. The old woman who'd given her the pendant was weaving through the crowded street outside. Without thinking, Jessica bolted after her. "Wait!" she called, dodging pedestrians. "Please, I need to talk to you." But as quickly as she'd appeared, the woman vanished, leaving Jessica breathless and even more confused in the middle of the sidewalk. Defeated, she returned home, only to find Abby with a babysitter she didn't remember hiring. Before she could process this new shock, her phone buzzed with an angry message from her ex-partner about a missed custody exchange. "I'm so sorry," Jessica said for what felt like the 1,000th time that day. "I don't know how I could have forgotten. It won't happen again." But the damage was done. She could see the hurt and confusion in Abby's eyes, the growing distrust. What kind of mother forgets her own custody schedule? As if the day couldn't get any worse, an email from her boss popped up on her phone. Missed deadlines, skipped meetings, a final warning about her job performance. Jessica felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she'd worked so hard for was slipping away. Her hand instinctively went to the pendant in her pocket. She could fix this. A few strategic pauses, and she could get back on track. Make things right with Abby, salvage her job. But even as the thought formed, Jessica knew it was wrong. Using the pendant was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. No, she had to face the consequences of her actions head-on, no matter how painful. That night, after Abby had gone to bed, Jessica sat on the edge of her own bed, the pendant heavy in her palm. How had things spiraled so out of control? She'd only wanted to make things better, to be the perfect mother and employee. Instead, she'd nearly lost everything that mattered. "No more," she whispered to the pendant, to herself. "I can't keep living like this." She set strict new rules for herself, emergencies only, no more trivial uses, and most importantly, no more neglecting Abby for the sake of strangers or work. As she drifted off to sleep, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. Jessica's dreams were a chaotic swirl of ticking clocks and missed moments. In the hazy space between sleep and waking, a realization began to form. The real gift of time wasn't the ability to pause it, but to be fully present in each precious, fleeting moment. The thought lingered as she fell into deeper sleep, a challenge and a promise for the difficult days ahead. Jessica's eyes fluttered open moments before her alarm was set to go off. For the first time in weeks, she felt a semblance of control. She carefully checked her phone, the bedside clock, and even peeked out the window to confirm the time with the position of the sun. All sources agreed. It was 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "Let's do this right." The morning routine flowed smoother than it had in ages. Abby was up, fed, and ready with time to spare. As they walked into the school, Jessica felt a surge of pride. "Ms. Patterson," Abby's teacher called out with a smile, "It's good to see you." Abby's been much more settled these past few days. Jessica's heart swelled. "We've been working on our routine," she replied, giving Abby's hand a squeeze. The workday started equally well. Jessica arrived at the office on time, greeting surprised colleagues with a confident smile. She tackled her backlog methodically, resisting the urge to reach for the pendant even as deadlines loomed. "Great work on the Hendricks file, Jessica," her boss commented, popping by her desk. "Keep this up, and we'll forget all about last week's hiccups." As lunchtime approached, Jessica stepped out for a quick bite. While waiting at a crosswalk, she witnessed a cyclist swerve to avoid a pedestrian, nearly colliding with a parked car. Her hand instinctively moved to her pocket, but she stopped herself. The near miss resolved itself without incident, leaving Jessica feeling both guilty and oddly liberated. The afternoon brought an unexpected challenge. Her phone buzzed with a message from Abby's school. "Reminder, 5th grade presentations today at 3 p.m. Parents welcome." Jessica's blood ran cold. Abby's big project, the one she'd been working on for weeks. How could she have forgotten? Panic set in as Jessica glanced at the clock. 2:15 p.m. Even if she left now, afternoon traffic would make it nearly impossible to arrive on time. Her fingers twitched towards the pendant, the temptation to pause time almost overwhelming. "No," she muttered, clenching her fists. "I made a promise." She hurriedly explained the situation to her boss and dashed out of the office. The drive was agonizing, each red light and slow driver feeling like a personal affront. Jessica's mind raced with justifications for using the pendant, just this once, for Abby's sake. But she resisted, white-knuckling the steering wheel as she inched through traffic. Jessica burst through the school doors at 3:17 p.m., her heels echoing in the empty hallway. She skidded to a stop outside Abby's classroom, her heart sinking as she heard applause from within. Peering through the window, she saw Abby at the front of the room, taking a small bow as her classmates clapped. The door opened, and Abby's eyes met Jessica's. The flash of disappointment and hurt in her daughter's gaze was like a physical blow. The car ride home was thick with tension. Abby stared out the window, responding to Jessica's attempts at conversation with monosyllabic grunts. "Honey, I'm so sorry," Jessica tried again. "Work was crazy, and You forgot." Abby cut her off, her voice small but sharp. "You always forget the important stuff." The words hit Jessica like a sledgehammer. They arrived home in silence, Abby disappearing into her room the moment they walked through the door. Alone in the kitchen, the weight of her failure crashed down on Jessica. She slumped against the counter, tears streaming down her face as sobs racked her body. How had she let things get so out of control? "Mom?" Abby's tentative voice cut through her breakdown. "Are you okay?" Jessica looked up, seeing concern mixed with the lingering hurt in her daughter's eyes. In that moment, something inside her broke. The lies, the secrecy, the constant juggling act. It all came pouring out. "No, sweetie, I'm not okay," Jessica said, her voice shaky. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Over the next hour, Jessica confessed everything. The pendant, the time manipulation, her struggles to balance it all. Abby listened with wide eyes, her expression shifting from disbelief to worry to understanding, as much as a 7-year-old could. So that's why you've been so weird lately? Abby asked when Jessica finally fell silent. Jessica nodded, wiping away tears. I thought I could make everything perfect, but I was so focused on pausing moments that I forgot to actually live them. Abby was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, to Jessica's surprise, she reached out and took her hand. Mom, we don't need perfect. We just need you. The real you, not some time-traveling superhero mom. The simple wisdom of her daughter's words hit Jessica like a revelation. She pulled Abby into a tight hug, feeling years of tension begin to melt away. No more secrets, Jessica promised. No more missed moments. From now on, we face everything together, in real time. As they sat there, holding each other, Jessica felt a shift inside her. The pendant in her pocket no longer seemed like a magical solution, but a heavy burden she was finally ready to put down. That night, as Abby slept peacefully, Jessica placed the pendant in a drawer. Her fingers lingered on its cool surface one last time before she closed the drawer firmly. There was a sense of loss, yes. The power she was giving up was immense, but alongside it was an overwhelming feeling of relief. No more fractured time, no more lies, no more missed connections with the people who truly mattered. As Jessica crawled into bed, she felt lighter than she had in months. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face them. One real, unpaused moment at a time. Jessica's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the soft morning light filtering through her curtains. For a moment, she felt disoriented. There was no blaring alarm, no immediate sense of urgency. Then she remembered. She hadn't set an alarm last night. It was part of her new commitment to live without constantly watching the clock. She resisted the urge to immediately check the time, instead, taking a deep breath and focusing on the sounds of the house waking up. Birds chirping outside, the distant hum of early morning traffic, and the soft padding of Abby's footsteps in the hallway. "Mom?" Abby's voice called out. "Are you awake?" "Coming, sweetie," Jessica replied, swinging her legs out of bed. As she made her way to the kitchen, she consciously avoided glancing at any clocks or her phone. The morning routine unfolded at a gentler pace than usual. Jessica and Abby worked together to make breakfast, chatting about the day ahead. When Abby asked what time it was, Jessica realized she didn't know, and more surprisingly, that not knowing didn't send her into a panic. "Let's just focus on enjoying our breakfast," she said with a smile. "We'll leave when we're ready." As they eventually made their way to school, Jessica felt a newfound presence in the moment. She noticed details she'd overlooked for weeks. The way Abby's hair caught the sunlight, the excited bounce in her step as she talked about her upcoming science project. Arriving at work, Jessica took a deep breath before stepping into the office. Her colleagues' surprised looks reminded her of how erratic her behavior had been recently. "Good morning, everyone," she said, projecting a calm she didn't entirely feel. The morning passed in a blur of playing catch-up. Without the pendant to rely on, Jessica found herself struggling to estimate how long tasks would take. She'd grown so accustomed to having extra time at her fingertips that working within normal constraints felt foreign. By lunchtime, stress was creeping in at the edges of her composure. As she sat down with her salad, Sarah slid into the chair across from her. "Okay, spill," Sarah said, her tone a mix of concern and curiosity. "What's been going on with you lately? One day you're super productive, the next you're missing meetings, and now you seem different." Jessica sighed, pushing a cherry tomato around her plate. "It's complicated," she began, then paused. How could she possibly explain without sounding crazy? "Let's just say I've been going through some things, but I'm working on getting my priorities straight." Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Well, whatever it is, I'm here if you need to talk. We all have our struggles, you know." The simple offer of support nearly brought tears to Jessica's eyes. She'd been so caught up in her time manipulation that she'd forgotten the value of genuine human connection. The afternoon brought a major test in the form of a client meeting. In the past, Jessica would have used the pendant to give herself extra preparation time. Now, she had to rely solely on her own knowledge and skills. As she stood to present, Jessica felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. But as she began to speak, she found herself fully engaged in the moment, responding to questions with a genuine presence she'd been lacking. When the meeting ended with handshakes and smiles, Jessica felt a surge of pride. She'd succeeded not through manipulation, but through her own abilities. The true challenge came at school pickup time. Traffic was heavier than usual, and Jessica felt the familiar panic rising as she watched the minutes tick by. Her hand twitched towards her pocket, muscle memory reaching for the pendant that was no longer there. "No," she muttered to herself. "We do this the regular way." She arrived at the school just as the final bell rang, finding Abby waiting with a mix of hope and apprehension on her face. The smile that bloomed when she spotted Jessica made every stressful moment of the day worthwhile. That evening, as they worked through Abby's homework together, Jessica marveled at how different it felt to be fully present. There was no underlying anxiety about pausing time, no mental calculations about how to fit more into the day. It was just her and Abby, tackling math problems and giggling over silly mistakes. Later, as Jessica tucked Abby into bed, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mom, I'm really glad you're here, like really here." The simple statement hit Jessica like a tidal wave of emotion. "Me too, sweetie," she managed, her voice thick. "Me too." Alone in her room, Jessica reflected on the day. It had been far from perfect. She'd fallen behind on some work, nearly been late for pickup, and felt constantly off-kilter. But beneath the challenges, there was an unexpected sense of peace. She was no longer fighting against time itself, but learning to flow with it. As she got ready for bed, Jessica's gaze fell on the drawer where she'd stashed the pendant. For a moment, her fingers itched to retrieve it. Just one use, to catch up on work or get ahead for tomorrow. But even as the thought formed, she knew she wouldn't act on it. The path she was on now was harder in many ways, but it was real. And that reality, with all its imperfections and genuine moments, was worth more than any borrowed time. Jessica turned away from the drawer and climbed into bed. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of both loss and liberation. The pendant's power was still there, tempting her. But for now, at least, she was choosing to live each moment as it came, unpaused, unaltered, and fully her own. The shrill beep of the alarm clock pierced the pre-dawn darkness, jolting Jessica from sleep. Her hand moved automatically to silence it, but as consciousness flooded in, a wave of déjà vu washed over her. The dim red glow of the clock face read, 5:30 a.m., a time that suddenly felt loaded with significance. Jessica sat up, her heart racing. Everything felt eerily familiar. The cool hardwood under her feet, the faint scent of coffee from the programmable maker in the kitchen. It was as if she'd been transported back in time, reliving a day she knew all too well. "Mommy?" Abby's small voice called out, right on cue. A mix of emotions swirled in Jessica's chest as she made her way to Abby's room. The sight of her daughter, dark curls a wild tangle around her face, hit Jessica with a force she wasn't prepared for. "Bad dream, sweetie?" Jessica asked softly, perching on the edge of the bed. Abby nodded, lower lip trembling. Without hesitation, Jessica gathered her into a tight hug, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. This time, she didn't feel the anxious pull of the day ahead. Instead, she savored the moment, recognizing its preciousness. "It's okay," she murmured. "I'm here. I'm always here." As they started their morning routine, Jessica moved with a calm she'd never possessed on that original frantic day. When Abby suddenly remembered the forgotten diorama, Jessica felt a smile tugging at her lips. "Don't worry," she said, surprising herself with her serenity. "We've got this." They worked together, quickly but not frantically, to assemble a passable rainforest scene. It wasn't perfect, but as Jessica helped Abby add the finishing touches, she realized that perfection wasn't the point. The shared moment, the teamwork, the giggles over lopsided trees. These were the things that mattered. The drive to school was tense but not chaotic. Jessica found herself noticing details she'd missed before. The way the morning light played on Abby's hair, the excited lilt in her voice as she talked about her upcoming day. As they pulled up to the school, Jessica's heart began to race. Her eyes scanned the crowd, knowing what, or rather who, she was looking for. And there she was, the old woman, standing near the entrance, her gaze fixed on Jessica with an intensity that transcended time. "Honey, wait here a moment," Jessica said, her voice slightly strained. She stepped out of the car, her legs feeling oddly weak as she approached the woman. Up close, the woman's eyes seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. Without a word, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the pendant, that simple yet powerful object that had turned Jessica's life upside down. "For you," the woman said, her voice exactly as Jessica remembered it. "Time is precious. Use it wisely." Jessica stared at the pendant, feeling its pull. For a moment she was tempted. The power to pause time, to fix mistakes, to have those extra precious moments. It was all there, hanging from the woman's outstretched hand. But then Jessica thought of all she'd been through, all she'd learned. She thought of the moments she'd missed while trying to create perfect ones, of the connections she'd neglected in her quest for control. "Thank you," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't need it. I've learned that the real gift is appreciating time as it is, not trying to control it." A slow smile spread across the woman's face, a look of profound understanding passing between them. "You've learned well," she said softly. "Remember, every moment is a gift, even the chaotic ones." With that, the woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if she'd never been there at all. Jessica returned to the car, her heart feeling lighter than it had in years. She helped Abby gather her things, then knelt down to look her in the eye. "Have a wonderful day, sweetie," she said, pouring all her love into the words. "I can't wait to hear all about it later." Abby's face lit up at the genuine enthusiasm in Jessica's voice. "Thanks, Mom," she said, throwing her arms around Jessica's neck. "Love you." As Jessica watched Abby skip into the school, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given a rare gift, not the power to pause time, but the wisdom to appreciate it as it flowed. Turning back to her car, Jessica felt ready to face whatever the day might bring. There would be challenges, certainly. Deadlines and meetings and all the usual stress of her job. But now she knew the secret. Every moment, whether calm or chaotic, was precious in its own way. As she drove to work, Jessica made a silent promise to herself and to Abby. She would be present for it all, the good, the bad, and everything in between. No more wishing for paused moments or perfect timing. This was her life, in real time, and she wouldn't miss a second of it. The future stretched out before her, full of uncertainty, but also brimming with potential. And Jessica was ready to embrace every unpaused, imperfect, beautiful moment of it.
Thank you for illuminating your imagination with the listening lamp. If our tale has sparked a light in your mind, we invite you to keep that flame burning. Subscribe to our podcast and join us again as we continue to explore the vast cosmos of human experience. Until next time, may your inner light guide you through the mysteries that await.